everyone. Well, welcome to the live D&D Q&A. I'm Mike Merles. I'm the group manager for the R&D team, and with me is Rodney Thompson.
Hey, everybody.
So I guess the way this is going to work is you will pass questions on to Trevor through the chat, and Trevor will ask us the questions.
Yes.
So we just launch right into questions, right?
Yeah. First off, let me go ahead and cover some of the stuff that I know people are going to ask. The first one is we don't have dates to announce yet for any of the product, so just want to get that out of the way. We don't have the product names to talk about yet. So I think those are two of the big things that you guys are going to ask that I know we can't talk about. Other than that, I will put the floor out there for Mike and Rodney here. Chris should be joining us soon.
He'll probably come bursting into the room.
Yeah, over on Rodney's side there.
He'll swing in on his rappelling through the window with a tuxedo.
I thought he was a robot, not a ninja spy over here. There we go. All right,
He's a man of many talents.
I'll start with a couple that I collected from Twitter first, so I can let the questions build up in chat here. But first, I think these are kind of softball questions, but we'll start with them. If you personally could pick the next setting for D&D Next after Forgotten Realms, what setting would you choose?
I saw this question on my Twitter feed, so I was very excited about it. I'm going to let Mike go first, though.
Oh, but you already have...
Okay, fine. I've already thought about my answer. So, keeping in mind that this is my answer if I was making the next campaign setting only for myself and not making any intelligent decisions about it, I would pick Al-Qadim, because I love Al-Qadim and it's my favorite campaign setting, and I love it. And you know, I've recently been rereading Arabian Nights stuff. I read Throne of the Crescent Moon recently, Saladin Ahmed's awesome fantasy novel, and so yeah, I would pick that.
So I think I'd go with I'd want Greyhawk, but I wouldn't want a lot for it because I already have all the old books. As long as I just have a good, mechanical framework for everything that Scarlet Brotherhood and things like that I use, and just some updates to that stuff. So I don't think I'd need a lot, but I think I'd like to see that.
You know, so Mike plays in my Greyhawk campaign, and one of the things that I would really like from something like that is just having all the information reorganized, because I'm using the folio from '79, I guess, is when that one came out.
81, I think.
Well, the box set was 81, right?
That was 83.
83.
I don't know. We're arguing.
I was 3 years old, so I don't know, right? And like all the information in there is great, but it's kind of all over the place. So when you guys are running around in Iron Gate or whatever, I actually have to look in like 3 different places for the information. So that would be something I would love to see.
Yeah, I think the philosophy, if we were to do this,
we're totally just spitballing.
Yeah, totally spitballing. But I don't think we'd feel the need to reinvent or the setting or advance the timeline. I think what I would do is take, let's say, the first box set, use that as the starting point, and then take the From the Ashes stuff that came later and present that as maybe a chapter on its own, saying, here's a possible future. Yeah. So I think that would actually be kind of interesting for a setting. I haven't really seen a tabletop role-playing setting do that.
We kind of did that a little bit with Dark Sun in 4th edition, because we reset back to...
Right. Before the Prison Pentad.
Yeah, we'll reset to after the first book,
okay,
basically, because we did say that Kalik is deposed, right?
Okay.
And we did say that, you know what, the Prison Pentad is a way things could turn out, right? So we didn't, because like that. People love those novels, right? So we didn't want to completely go back there. But as far as presenting the campaign setting itself, we picked a moment in time, right?
Yeah.
Now, nothing. I don't know that I've seen a setting do an actual, like, inside the same book or product or whatever. I don't think I've seen a potential future done. So that would be unique.
Yeah, because I think it'd be kind of nifty to point the DM at, well, here's some potential NPCs you can interact with that are going to have a big impact on the future.
Well, in a lot of ways, it's sort of like providing an adventure or campaign in that, like this, here's a path you could take as the DM. Now, if you don't want to take that path, go a completely different direction, that's fine. But like giving sort of endpoints, there's something interesting about like, here's a potential endpoint or waypoint along the timeline. How do you get to there, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting potential. And when you start talking about like what happened between the first box set and From the Ashes, all the events that take place in there, those are theoretically adventure hooks, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be cool. Now Al-Qadim doesn't have that issue because they're like it was here's the setting and done. Like there were no novels, there was no real progress in the setting. So that's one that I would do the other way, which is just collect, reorganize, don't need to redefine. I mean, part of that's just because I love the setting, right? And I'm like, no, it's perfect. And then the updated mechanics, I think, would be the biggest useful thing to me because I'm going to want to run a Jair or
Yeah, exactly.
whatever, right? And like the setting doesn't need to change. Just give me the cool 5th edition mechanics and go from there.
Yeah.
So I like this question because it gives you guys a chance to talk about something that people may not have seen yet. So what is the one thing that has you most excited about releasing a new edition of D&D?
Just one thing.
Oh, here's Chris.
There is Chris Perkins.
Hey, Saved by the Bell.
Now you guys are going to have to get all real cozy because the camera's too close. You gotta hug Rodney there, Chris.
Okay. I'm smaller now.
That's perfect. Yeah, someone did ask. One of the questions was, "Has Rodney been working out?" So.
Yeah, I have lost a significant amount of weight. Yes, I spent the last year changing all of my dietary habits and working out.
Good times. He's actually headed off to get married soon.
That's right. I leave for my wedding and honeymoon tomorrow.
Just getting a little bit personal for Rodney.
Yes, that's right. Just a little peek into my personal life.
Chris Perkins, could you go ahead and introduce yourself to the crowd for the few people who may not know who you are?
Hi, I'm Chris Perkins.
and we're done. What do you do here at Wizards, Chris Perkins?
I don't know. I am the story and world building design manager for D&D.
Good time. So I'll ask this question again so Chris can hear it too. What is the one thing that has you most excited about releasing a new edition of D&D?
It's tough because we're at the end stages. The excitement gets a little.
Yeah.
If you'd asked us a year ago, like, oh, this is great. Now it's like, geez, let's never do this again. Seriously, I never want to do this again. I've done it twice. I never want to do it again. I think the thing is, it's just the little things that start clicking, especially at this stage where so much of the work is done and you're just trying to get everything to fit together. It's just finding things where just little corrections here and there that are making things move more smoothly. So, it's funny, at the beginning, it was things like, we've got the fighter working, right? And we're really happy. This, for me, I guess, the thing that gets me excited is when the game feels like the game's just working and things are moving very smoothly and you don't feel like you're playing a work in progress. And I think we've been there for a while now. Like, it's been fun. The more we've played, the more we've gone on. As we play ourselves, the fewer and fewer bumps we run into. So
Yeah.
that feels good. To play an entire session and not feel like it's a play test. To just feel like we're just playing the game.
Yeah. I think we all kind of agreed that, like, around the time that the public playtest was ending, that's when things started feeling like we're just playing D&D.
Yeah.
I think for me, when you're a designer and you're working on something, it's really easy to get so close to the project that all you can see are the flaws, or all you can see are like the work you still have to do, right? It's going to get more exciting for me again when we have product in our hands, because there's sort of magic that happens. Like, I just look at like Excel spreadsheets and Word files and see plain text, and I don't see any of the art, I don't see any of the layout or anything until really we have a product. So once I get the product in my hands, that's the thing I'm most excited about, because then it goes from being just like, here's the thing I've worked on for the last 3.5 years or whatever it was. Now it's a real game and it's got real inspiration, and plus, like, even I will be surprised, like, hey, that's a really rad piece of art that I didn't even know existed. So, like, my next excitement milestone will be holding a physical product.
Yeah, you've basically been building like 1/5 of a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
You haven't been allowed to see the other 4/5 of the picture.
I haven't had time to see the rest of the picture.
Yeah, I get to see everything. So
Yeah.
it's
You guys
I'm
have
jaded.
you guys have the bird's eye view. I'm
Yeah.
so down in the weeds that it's just like, okay, everything is just a bunch of numbers and text to me. I don't even know anymore.
Yeah.
So let's see here. I got a whole bunch of questions from. Here you go. With 3D dragons being centered around dragons, can you tell us more about how dragons are shaping up in the game? Will all dragons be legendary creatures, or will we have non-legendary ones as well?
There are legendary dragons and non-legendary ones, particularly the ancient and very old dragons. They can have legendary characteristics, but your typical young adult or dragon wormling, no, not so much.
Yeah. Dragon has to make a name for itself first.
Exactly.
But they're pretty deadly. I mean, we were just looking, reading something today. Where I think there's a dragon in a thing I can't talk about. But if you really mess up, like if the dragon knows you're coming, you're probably all going to die.
Yeah.
Like, I'm pretty certain if you let that dragon ambush you and then breathe on you,
Yeah.
you're not going to survive. So dragons, we are very intentionally making very deadly.
Yeah, they're also some of the most versatile monsters I think that we've got right now because, like Chris alluded to, we've got multiple age categories. So there's actually a bunch of different ways you can use them. And we previewed back in Legends and Lore like a year and a half ago the concept of like the lair and everything playing into it. So not only do you have you've got your younger dragons that are just sort of monster-like, then you've got your legendary dragons, and then if it's a legendary dragon in its lair, it's got all these options. So there's actually a whole bunch of ways to use them. I don't know that there's any other monsters that we have right now that are as versatile, or that can provide as many different experiences. Maybe I should say that. I can't think of one. So yeah, they're pretty great.
Cool.
Maybe beholders.
We have another one about Tourney of Dragons here. Can we get an overview of the event? Will it be a realm-shaking event or a regular one? And how will the adventure be? Big sandbox type thing. Basically, what do you guys want to tell this crowd about Tourney of Dragons?
So I'll let Chris go into more of the details of the story, but for us in terms of like whether it's like a realm-shaking event, we're really trying to get away from things that permanently alter the landscape of the realms. So when I think of realm-shaking event, I think of things like the Time of Troubles, where like the roster of deities is permanently changed and some classes go away and things like that. We want to get much more in the mode of we're telling stories that if you miss the story, it's not like if you come in later, you have to go back and learn about that story to figure out why things are the way they are. So we're seeing the events as being a little more self-contained and a little more localized in the sense that it's not the entire planet that's coming under the influence of something. It's happening in a region. It's a specific story involving a specific set of characters rather than giant world-spanning things all the time. We might do something like that, but even then, I don't want to be in a mode of the setting becomes so hard to follow because every year everything is getting completely rearranged. Or every 5 years we're completely reinventing the setting. It's kind of like when Rodney and I were answering the question earlier about settings, where we don't really want the trademark thing that we use to get people excited to be, we're throwing everything in the air and seeing where it lands again. Being much more just, like, we're just going to tell a fun story. And we kind of have these parameters set of what the setting is, and we don't want to mess with those because people like the setting. So why reinvent it all the time? If people like it, that's good. Like, that's why people like it in the first place. We don't need to reinvent it every 4 or 5 years. So,
yeah, we want to show off stories too that illustrate the best that the Forgotten Realms has to offer, and show off organizations, take us to cities that we know, have some stakes without uprooting everything. And we want these stories to flow from one to the next, so there is sort of an inherent sense of continuity and without being jarring or without destroying things that people really love about the world.
Yeah, high stakes doesn't necessarily have to mean completely alters the landscape of the entire setting, right?
yeah.
I mean, the high stakes in the Tyranny of Dragons story is the threat of an alliance between a number of very powerful evil dragons that, if that were left unchecked, the end results would be quite calamitous. But we know that there are organizations that are going to stand against the threat, and it's about that conflict and how it ultimately is resolved.
So, Mike, you got to ask this question at PAX East, and you gave an awesome number, but I'm going to ask it again. How complete are the rules at this point?
I'd say like 95%, even that might even be higher than what we said at PAX East. It's probably even, I mean, the kind of questions we're dealing with right now are things like, I think the orc has 2 hit points too many,
yeah.
Things like that. The Hobgoblin's con is, it's like 14, I think it should be 12. Should goblins have like throwing spears or short bow? Like, we're really just we're really just smoothing off the edges now.
Yeah, a lot of the work that I've been doing lately has been the last rounds of both external and internal feedback coming from people that were playtesting for us. Anytime they would notice like bugs, I'm bug squashing basically, right? That's my job right now. And then like Mike was saying, a lot of number work, a lot of working with Chris and Jeremy on monster numbers, stuff like that. I mean, we're not really doing any design right now. We're firmly in development editing.
The only things that are getting designed are the optional things. We did play test of the mass combat rules yesterday.
Yeah.
We had a battle between 200 bandits and an 8th level fighter versus 4 5th level characters and about 60 guards guarding a caravan. And the characters won barely, So
Yeah.
I kind of felt like that's the way it should work out. So yeah, that's kind of stuff we're working on now. But even that, this is actually I talked about in the Legends lore on Monday. The mass combat rules draw very heavily on the core combat rules. The entire idea is we're actually kind of erring on the side of making them less realistic and more like, well, you can use the miniatures you have, you can use the battle mat you already have. If you already know the combat rules and a player is commanding an army, the stats he's looking at are almost identical to what he sees for like from the monster manual for a character. So, erring on the side of making things. I mean, that's more the philosophical stuff has kind of already been solved, a lot of that. Like, I want things to be very compatible. So even there with the mass combat rules, it's not a lot of design, just so much as making sure that those relationships make sense and it's easy to go back and forth, and that when you play it, it's fun and it's achieving sensible results.
Yeah, I really feel like we've been vindicated lately by our early decisions to create the simpler core system that we can then modify however we want to later. Because now that we are getting into the realm of working on optional systems, rules, modules, whatever you want to call it, it's way easier than it could have been. Right?
Yeah.
Like I have been very pleased with the end result of that philosophy, because now we can do things like minor tweaks to the base rules that have a larger result, but we know what we're doing and we can do it fast and we can do it easily and we can test it easily, right? There's not a lot of intertwining complexity to get in the way of that. It's just, what do we need to happen, make it happen simply, and then test it, right? And so like the mass combat thing is a great example where if we had a more complex core system, that would be harder to do and harder to run and harder to test, but since we've done it simply, we're getting big results out of small tweaks, I think.
Exactly.
Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, because the mass combat rules in total, I think, are 4 pages. And I think that includes a lot of the commentary on how to use them. So.
Yeah. For me and Jeremy, a lot of our time now is just spent on the production side of things. We have all the art, we have all the text, we have a design for our products, and now we're just making sure that everything fits.
Yeah.
Good stuff. This might be more of a fun question. What one class mechanic are you really happy or excited to see once the game comes out? You may want to pick one that people may not know about.
I really like the Warlock, and I really like playing it in the live stream. I was really happy with how the boons, whatever they're called, I forgot the name, in my spells and getting them back. It really feels Warlocky without it feeling too abusive. And it feels distinct from playing a wizard. So I gotta say, I really like how the Warlock turned out. I like that sort of having a few spells but being able to cast them more often, and then having those constant magical boons.
The invocations.
Invocations. There we go.
Yeah.
It's Friday.
I've got a Warlock in my my every other Monday game that I run. I'm running Forgotten Realms, and he's really getting a lot of mileage out of his invocations as well, because they sort of let him play that magical trickster type character that he's trying to play with more focus on the magic side of things. Class mechanic I'm most excited about that maybe people don't know about. I think I'm pretty excited actually about the Battlemaster Fighter, which we've talked about in public a little bit in D&D Next Q&A and Legends and Lore. I'm actually pretty happy with the way that came out, because it's another great example of how we can get a lot of mileage out of relatively simple mechanics just by picking these combinations of maneuvers. Gives me a very different flavor of character, right? Like I want to play something that's sort of warlordy, I pick these 3 maneuvers and I'm just doing that, right? I want to play a guy who's really up in your face, shoving you, tripping you, etc. I can do that without having to step outside of class mechanics or anything like that. I don't tend to play super complex characters, but I like just enough complexity in my characters that I'm making sort of round-to-round decisions, simple ones. And I think the Battlemaster is giving me a lot of that, because you're making a big choice. I'm not choosing which of 5 different ways do I want to trip the guy. I'm choosing, do I want to trip the guy or push the guy or help my buddy over there? And I think it's a type of fighter or a type of character really that is giving me those choices without making me feel like those choices are difficult, if that makes sense. It's an easy choice to make, but I feel satisfied when I make it.
Do you have any class features you're excited about, Chris?
I don't know what people have been told, what they know
You can
about.
say whatever.
You just pick a class feature. Be excited about.
I like the way the Barbarian works. I like the way the Rage works. I traditionally have found the class kind of uninteresting and uninspired. This is the first edition where I've really felt like I could play a barbarian for a long period of time and enjoy it for a long period of time. There's a simplicity to it, but I mean, the things that interest me most about classes aren't necessarily the mechanical nuggets. It's all of the stuff that we've done around backgrounds and quirks and ideals, the things that really sort of allow me to create a character that's going to have an arc, so the character can grow and find opportunities to use the inspiration mechanic throughout the course of his adventuring career. I find that with a simple character like Barbarian, and I typically enjoy simpler characters, Barbarian, Ranger, Fighter, that they give me more mileage and more toys to play with that aren't purely mechanical.
Nice. So since we've talked about on the player side a little bit, let's switch to the DM side. What cool thing that you know is coming out to help DMs are you excited about, as far as like what's in the books?
Well, I'd say I take what Chris said for players and for DMs, inspiration and having bonds, flaws, ideals, the stuff that really bakes into your character, your connections to the campaign. It gives you direction from a story arc standpoint, not just like who is my character as a person, not just a bundle of numbers. So I actually really like how you can integrate that into your campaign. In a playtest game I ran, which we had to stop because people's schedules and stuff, but I like that one of the players was playing a rogue, and his he through that system ended up with a guy who was out to kill him, and this assassin who was stalking and killing him. And it was just kind of cool, like that story hook just kind of popped out of him thinking about his character's bonds and flaws and stuff like that. So yeah, I really like this because I think it pushes people to make more well-rounded characters.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that on the DM side. In that Monday game I was talking about, Scott Kurtz is playing a ranger who has this statue that he found. This is always part of his backstory. Statue that he found that is this sort of weird statue. And last night we were playing, and in the middle of the session, I was like, Scott, you hear a strange voice coming from your backpack. He's like, what? And so he pulls out the statue, and the statue is talking to him, and only he can hear it. And I just made all that stuff up based on the background and the flaws and everything that Scott had come up with, because he was like, oh, he's an outlander, and he's sort of lives on his own. He's really weird, and he doesn't really relate well to other people. So I was like, okay, how can we play up this sort of socially strange guy who's got this weird statue? And it actually ended up being this like hour-long sequence of role-playing between the characters who were freaking out because they're huge half-orc ranger, or no, he's human. This human ranger is all of a sudden stops in the middle of the dungeon and just starts talking to this weird statue that he's got, and it actually ended up being a great sequence. And in the middle of it, one of my other players said something, and I realized I could tie what was happening into his backstory too, right? And now all of a sudden, these two characters that were completely unrelated, now all of a sudden are asking questions like, wait a minute, how does your statue know that about my background, right? And it just it really spiraled out of...
Like that. How does your statue know about it?
Right. Yeah, exactly, right? It's completely weird, and I basically made it up on the fly. But I could do that because my players had provided me with all this information about their characters' backstories and histories, and also what they were interested in role-playing, right? And that's super useful to me as a DM. That's more useful to me as a DM than any other player mechanic, I think. That's safe to say.
Do you want to end to that, or are you happy with the flaws and all that stuff?
Well, as a long-time DM who's preparing to kick off his 5th edition campaign,
we may be playing again.
I really like the way the monsters have shaped up. I like the simplicity of them, but at the same time, I know that there are going to be ways given to me as a DM to customize the monsters that are very, very easy and give them lots of flavor and lots of color. So if I want to use the baseline hill giant, it's simple and straightforward, and it's going to make combats go so much more smoothly. But if I want to add a weird feature to the giant, it's no problem at all. No problem.
I like these answers.
Like if it picks up characters and smashes them into the ground, or throws them up against walls, or punts them like a football.
Or uses them as a weapon to get other characters.
Exactly.
I'm no longer excited to play against this game.
Trevor's excitement is waning.
that's probably going to be me in all those cases. All right, here, let's go back to this list of questions. Here's one that gets more into something we've heard since we started doing the playtest. What can you tell us about tactical grid rules? The current rules don't have a lot about flanking and position. An advantage is that one big thing that seems a little bit stronger than flank. What do you guys have in there for these tactical grid rules or this tactical combat beyond what people have already seen?
Do you want to talk about the Rodney?
Yeah. What am I allowed to say?
Talk about it.
Okay, super. You heard it here from my boss. So one of the things that we wanted to do is make sure that in like the on the player side of things, there was some pretty basic information about how to use a grid. I think we showed that off in the playtest, so people have seen that. On the DM side of things, though, we didn't necessarily want it to be like, okay, you're using a grid, therefore you must use a whole bunch of other rules. So we are taking the approach of add in as much or little of these optional tactical rules as you want to. So things like flanking, for example, I've written up some rules for here's what flanking does for you in tactical combat, but it isn't something you have to use as a dungeon master, but if you choose to, that's totally fine. Chris sort of actually alluded to some of the things we're doing for monsters that are like, here are optional things that monsters can do. A lot of that was geared towards making that tactical experience a little more satisfying. So for example, if you're not playing with a grid, having a monster pushing you around 5 feet at a time is not super exciting because that 5 feet sort of vanishes into your mental image, right? But on the grid, it could make more of a difference. We're trying to let that be the purview of the DM to decide how complex he wants to get, because I can definitely see, and I've done this myself, wanting to use a grid for positioning's sake, not for like, okay, this is going to be a super tactical fight. No, it's just we're going to throw it on the battle mat so I can tell you where everybody is, right? By the same token, if I'm running a big climactic fight that I do want to be this, couple hour long climactic battle, I might want to say, okay, guys, we're going to use these flanking rules, and we're going to start using these optional monster abilities that are more tactically oriented. I've even written up some rules for things like, okay, so your buddies are providing cover to the monsters you're shooting at. Here's the optional rule for hitting your buddy with your ranged attacks if you want to use this. Now, there's a lot of people that want to run a more cinematic game that have no interest in friendly fire, right? And that's fine, totally acceptable. But if you really want to push that tactical experience, you could implement that rule and it would give you a very different experience. I think rather than trying to tell DMs, do you want tactical play? Here's everything you have to use, and it's this giant bundle of rules. Taking the more piecemeal approach is going to let a DM and a group of players choose their complexity and choose the level of tactical engagement they have. And I think that's, we've talked a lot about letting players choose their complexity with the different character types they choose. I think we want that to be just as true for DMs. Yeah, I think we want that for just as true for DMs.
Cool. So we've got a question here about iconic monster fights. Is there anything being done to make these kind of solo monster fight encounters more dynamic? So I know you guys have talked in the past about the environment playing an effect. I didn't know how much we could talk about that. Basically, in whatever monster stat blocks for these awesome iconic encounters, how are they set up to make these things awesome?
So if we take an example, say the Beholder, not only is it a legendary monster and it has abilities that it can do off turn, basically what we call legendary actions. It also can, its lair also has basically a turn in the initiative order where things can happen on that initiative count just simply because the Beholder is there. In addition, the Beholder has reactions. So when you're fighting Beholder, it almost feels like it's doing something on its turn. It's firing basically its eye rays a lot.
And the lair actions do that too.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly. One of its legendary actions is to fire an eye ray. So if it gets a certain number of legendary actions in a round, it can fire off eye rays off its turn, and really give you the sense that it almost feels like you're fighting multiple monsters, but you're not.
It's a great also example of how we've provided the DM with tools that he or she can choose not to use, right? Because, I mean, if you get to a high enough level, like you say you're running a party full of 20th level players, and you want to have 3 or 4 beholders in a fight, you don't have to opt into the full range of complexity there. You can use just the monster itself, and it will produce, you know, a less complex fight than the beholder with his legendary actions in a lair would produce. I think that's valuable flexibility.
That's awesome. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Mike?
Nope.
Alrighty.
And so the beholder stat block right here.
We can look at. Let's swing back to Tyranny of Dragons real quick. Will there be draconic elements for the players fighting on either side of Tyranny of Dragons, like mounts, familiars, anything that ties them to the dragon allies they might have? Is that something we can talk about at all, Chris?
No.
Okay. No, we can't talk about it?
No, we can't talk about it.
Okay. That's a fine answer for me. Let's see here. Question for Chris. Will we see more of Dungeon Master experience from the Dungeon Master for Life, Chris Perkins?
No.
And to be fair, Chris,
Not for a while.
all these guys are super busy right now,
Yeah.
getting all this stuff wrapped up.
It's not simply a matter of time. It's really, before I can speak intelligently about the Dungeon Master experience, I have to have a really good 5th edition Dungeon Master experience to share. So I have to kick off my 5th edition campaign and kind of avail myself of everything that 5th edition has to offer, and then I can start putting together a plan for sharing what I've discovered and what I've learned from my own experiences.
Cool.
So it'll be some time before I feel comfortable enough to tackle it as a subject in a mature and intelligent fashion.
Basically, he needs his players to make a huge amount of mistakes that he can then exploit
Yeah.
and then write about.
I need stories.
That's right.
Yeah.
I need the stories in my campaign to frame the conversations that I want to have.
Very good. Back to the product here. Let's see. Out of the box, how complex and/or rules heavy will the basic no added options version of 5e be compared with previous editions? The previous edition's initial core releases.
It'll probably, so the, let's see, basic D&D would be as complex as, I would say take the red box D&D set from back in the day. No, take the Rules Cyclopedia. That's probably a good one to start with. So people don't know, that's the one hardcover book that encapsulated all of basic D&D from levels 1 to 36. So take that, probably, let's see, you have your core 4 classes, the core 4 races, pretty straightforward class progression. It's probably at about that level of complexity, but then add in some basic things like obviously the task, the way you do stuff is different than it was back in the 80s and the 70s. So take the basic core mechanic of D20 plus an ability mod, plus maybe your bonus for a skill or whatever, and then add that on top of the basic the level of complexity from the Rules Cyclopedia, and then only from levels 1 to 20. We don't go up into the 20s or the 30s, and like they did in basic D&D. And I think that's about it. The monsters are a little more complicated because back in basic D&D, most monsters just had an attack line and then a couple like spell-like abilities. So they're a little more complicated because we more call out, like, the orc's using an axe, it's reflected in its attack. But yeah, I'd say that's what we're aiming for. There is a little bit more because characters have a bit more because characters have skills now, and that's really actually the only, and more class features. The basic fighter just got his hit die and his better attack bonus. We are adding things like the improved crit and things like that, and action surge.
But I think you get some gains in the simplicity of the core mechanics as well. There are fewer unique core mechanics in version.
Yeah, so I guess I'd say compared to the basic D&D as expressed in the D&D Rules Cyclopedia, which came out like late 80s, early 90s, it's about the same in terms of at-the-table complexity, and it's probably a little more in terms of there's probably more rules in the basic version of 5th edition. But I think those rules go toward making things easier to understand. So if there's things like we need to climb this wall, it's a regular rule that, okay, I know the core mechanic, I know how to resolve this, as opposed to, well, maybe I have to look this up because the rules for climbing are more idiosyncratic. So would you guys agree with that? Do you think that makes
I think that's ballpark, right? Yeah.
Good stuff here. Let's go switch to the DM a little bit. Is the DM going to have guidelines for creating a certain feel in a game, such as a dark, gritty game or a Renaissance level world?
Yeah.
That was an easy question. Can we elaborate on what kind of rules that might look like for supporting those kinds of settings?
Excuse me. So one of the things I think we're going to talk about, the way we approach this is to think, when a DM creates a campaign, you might pick a genre that's goes really far beyond what D&D typically covers. So there are some like horror or higher tech campaigns like firearms and stuff that we are working up rules for. So we can just kind of like what Rodney was talking before about like complexity in combat. It's the same thing for campaigns. If you want to run a horror campaign where the players are scared a lot, it's like you see a monster and there's a fear element or rules for madness. That's something it's not hard for us to add on to the core game because again we're making a very simple core. It's much easier to add stuff on top of it than it is to go back and modify things that already exist.
And we'll also give DMs guidance for what to do if they decide they don't want, say, magic items in their game.
Yeah.
How does that affect the economy or creatures that traditionally have immunities or resistances to magic items? How do you balance that?
Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, is just getting DMs to think of those questions because
Yeah.
you might say, well, in my campaign, yes, creatures that can only be hurt by magic weapons or that magic weapons are more effective against are just scarier. But just to start thinking, what does that mean for your campaign? What implications?
One of the questions we see a lot is also wondering if people will have guidelines for changing the pace of the game, for like how short rests work and how long rests work.
Yeah,
that's something that's in there.
And we've intentionally tried to refer to the short rest as a short rest rather than giving it, like in the rules text, I want to say like a while ago I was reviewing the monk, and the monk had things like, well, if the monk rests for an hour, this happens. Instead making sure we're saying, no, it's a short rest, because in your campaign, a short rest might be 5 minutes, because you want a lot of more complicated fights, so you want the players to have more resources. Or you might say, no, in my campaign, a short rest is 4 hours, because I don't want, or the short rest is the 8-hour rest, and the long rest is a week away, it's a week's rest, because I want a more grittier campaign. So by using those terms, we can let DMs modify the actual time period attached to them. So.
Yeah, a lot of what the rest example is a good one. A lot of what resting changes will do is they'll change, like the chance that you can be interrupted, right? And so basically you have to take into account things like, okay, if a short rest is only 10 minutes instead of an hour, if you're using sort of our typical time scale, you might only have a 1 in 20 chance of getting interrupted as opposed to a slightly higher chance with an hour, right? Or but basically, we look at all the different time frames and say, what are the repercussions of tweaking this up or down?
Yeah.
The question I'm seeing here a lot, people want us to talk about Greyhawk. We mentioned a little bit about other campaign settings at PAX East, so I didn't know if you want to talk a little bit about that and what our approach is for supporting those settings.
I think we can't really talk about support yet, because we can't really talk about products, but I think the approach we talked about with Greyhawk of sort of respecting what's there already applies to all of our settings, and really trying to get into the business of like take Dragonlance for example. I don't think we'd want to say, well, what's the next era of Dragonlance and reinvent it. I think we'd want to say, well, what would be the most interesting place to run a role-playing campaign, and maybe say, okay, we're going to set this just as the War of the Lance is beginning, and say, well, here's the story, the original trilogy, and here's what could happen, and here's what canonically would happen. But in your campaign, what might be different? Does it start out with there aren't any cleric player characters because the gods haven't yet returned? Can we give you details on what would it be like to help the gods return, or if the hero's lance succeed, what does it mean for your characters when the gods come back? And again, kind of like the Greyhawk example, kind of going back and saying we can treat that future as a feature in the setting, saying, well, here's how things played out. What does it mean for your campaign? If your characters meet Kidiera early on before she's a dragon high lord, and they become friends with her or they become enemies of her, what does that mean? It's actually kind of interesting because you get to maybe more integrate your characters into the actual setting, and then start changing things. And I think that's actually a good way for us to approach our settings. That's how I like to do it.
Sounds great.
Yeah. On the DM side of things, I know we've talked about moving the magic items out of just basic play. You don't have to have magic items to play. So what do you guys think about the magic items entry as DMs? Do you guys like the flavor of it? You like how it's set up? What do you guys want to talk about for magic items as far as they go?
Well, let's see. The DMG is full of them.
There's plenty of them.
Yeah, we went back through the legacy of the game and are pulling forward a lot of the most iconic magic items, and not only representing them, but also artistically rendering them.
Yeah.
We commissioned a lot of new art to basically capture the appearance of these classic magic items, many of which, oddly enough, have never been depicted before visually.
That's been pretty fun. I like the tables we've included to customize items.
Oh yeah,
I
yeah,
love that.
that's
I
really
like,
Love
good.
that.
Yeah, because I've never been a fan of just you find a +1 sword.
Yes.
I've always liked I remember playing running games back in like grade school, and it was never. I mean, when you're running, especially for first timers, it's not. Oh yeah, you open the tomb and there's a +1 sword. It's you open the tomb and there's a sword that's covered in dust and dirt, and when someone picks it up, it flares to light, gleams with magical radiance, and the story behind
Or it
the
suddenly
weapon.
wants to point in a certain direction.
Yeah,
or-
exactly,
yeah,
right.
Exactly.
So things like that. I like making magic items more interesting, not just having them be a +1 bonus to attack, but putting a story behind them, giving them a reason to exist. And
Allowing
actually-
for actual discovery and exploration.
yeah.
Would you guys say that there's just more of that in this version of the game than we've seen recently, I guess? Like, well, it sounds like we've got our backgrounds, we've got some items that are in equipment that are just there for flavor. You've got a whole bunch of flavor stuff that's in the magic items.
Well, and just trying to capture the essence of the game, we really recognize that there are three kind of legs that the whole game stands on. One is combat, obviously. The other is social interaction, and then the third is exploration. And just part of making sure that that leg of the table is strong is just adding as much to the game as we can to make the sense of discovery
Yeah.
apparent in every session.
Yeah. And really emphasizing the idea that in a tabletop role-playing game like D&D, you can do anything. It's not just a menu of options. It's what can you think of? Now, the menu is useful, especially for new players, or if you just not everyone wants to have to invent something whole cloth every time it's their turn, or every time they have to think of what to do. But really looking at it more in terms of that fully integrated approach, like taking a character's background. Like for instance, if we were to publish an adventure and have sample characters with it you could play, we would know to put in okay, we know there's a beholder later on in the adventure, so we'll put in one character's background that you have sworn to hunt down and kill that beholder or something like that. Really making it bringing in more of those narrative things that transcend the rules, because people don't play the game to follow the rules. They play the game for the experience of playing the game, and a lot of that is if the rules are the hardware, the software is well, I'm playing a half-mad time-traveling wizard, or I'm playing this this character who's utterly dedicated to these rules of law and will would happily sacrifice himself if the rules at that weird code he's following dictated it, or the character with the talking statue and things like that. That is the stuff. And a really big part of what motivated our design was based on when you talk to people who play D&D, what do they talk about, and making sure the things they talk about, because that's the thing that's important enough to them, they want to share it with other people. The classic thing is people telling you about their character. Well, there's the person who will tell you my character can do X damage per round and has his feats. Or abilities, whatever. But far more people want to say things like, well, here's the time that the halfling rogue betrayed the party, blah, blah, and here's what happened, or here's why he did it. Or I had a character who became the king of this land, and he screwed up, and there was a revolt, and et cetera, all this stuff. Much more the events that happened to the characters, not just, when people think of characters from comics or movies or books, they don't say, oh, I like, Gandalf's cool because he's the most powerful wizard. If you like Gandalf as a character, it's more his character traits, not just that he can, shoot light out of his staff, that's what makes him cool.
I find that there are things in this edition, everywhere I look, that just are sources of inspiration. The statue example that Rodney gave earlier reminded me of a table in the player's handbook, which is just here is a random table of trinkets that your character may have in addition to their equipment, and many of them are just they just encourage story.
Yeah.
One of the items is like a pentacle with a rat face in the middle. And as soon as the player tells me that his character has that, I'm already thinking about what that actually means
Right.
in my world.
Exactly.
I think two of the most valuable tools that we've put into this for players and DMs are randomness and combinations, right? And I could go into a whole talk about how combinations affect psychology. It's sort of why of creative people. It's sort of why games like Apples to Apples and Cards Against Humanity work because you take two things and combine them and you tell an interesting story, right? And we've got that all over the place in our game, right? The magic item tables are built on that, right? When you take okay, this has a celestial origin, and its purpose was to be used by a hero. What does that mean, right? And I use that exact example. You missed it because you missed the session, but in our Greyhawk game, the players found a ring, and I said, okay, this ring is made of human bone, but it's etched with the symbols of St. Cuthbert on it. And because and that was just the flavor of the ring, right? And because I described it that way, Chris Tulloch, who's playing a paladin of Foltest, wouldn't take the item, even though I had put it in the treasure. I was like, okay, Chris will want this, right? He was like, no, I can't take it because I worship Foltest, and he wouldn't use a holy relic of St. Cuthbert, right? And that was just something that, like, no impact on the mechanics, right? It was just, I rolled two things on the table. How do these fit together? Oh, they fit together like that. Because we have that all over the place, it really encourages DMs and players to be creative in a way that just giving them a blank slate doesn't, right? I actually, it's funny, you know, in your development as a D&D fan or player, when I was younger, you know, you first start out, it's like random tables, yay, and then eventually I kind of hit that point where I was like, oh, I don't use random tables, I make everything up myself because I am a beautiful, unique snowflake, and I'm creative, right? Because I had a huge ego when I was 16, apparently. But yeah, like now, I love those random tables because it spurs me in a creative direction that I wouldn't normally go in. If you just give me the blank sheet of paper, I'm like, yeah, it's a ring of feather falling and it's made of purple metal, right? Not even nearly as interesting as taking two things, combining them, and figuring it out. That's why Gamma World, the last version of Gamma World we did, I loved the character creation in that because it was like, okay, how do I combine these two elements to create a flavorful character? So we're using that all over the place in our game, and I think that's very powerful. And because it's all random, that's why I think the exploration element is higher, is because you don't know what to expect.
Exactly.
You literally don't know what to expect because you don't know what combination you're going to get next.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about random tables, I have a question earlier that might be too specific, but we'll ask it anyway. What's your favorite effect from the current iteration of the Wild Surge table?
Oh, do you guys have
Yeah, exactly. You've been looking at like 5,000 different rules.
Yeah,
I don't know that you can
they also
remember one
change,
specific
right?
table.
Like that's one of those things that, you know, we look at player feedback and people will say this particular entry is not good because blah, right? So a lot of those have actually changed. So I'm not sure I even know the full extent of what's on them. One of my favorite ones that I don't know if it is going to survive is what was it?
I know one that didn't survive.
We can talk about that too.
The summoning of the Pit Fiend.
Yeah, yeah, that one did not.
Random summoning Pit
survive.
Fiend.
Let's see here. I don't see it on here.
I see one that I like, so I'll just read it.
Okay.
You become invisible for the next minute. During that time, other creatures can't hear you. The invisible ends if you attack or cast a spell. So that's kind of fun. You just disappear. I just picked that one at random. May or may not be my favorite.
What's your favorite right now?
Another random one on here is a random creature within 60 feet of you becomes intoxicated for 1d4 hours.
Yeah, that's pretty solid. Yeah, I don't think it survived, but one of my old favorite ones was 1d10 hostile flumps appear within 10 feet of you, right? And it was just like, what are hostile flumps? What does that even mean?
It means they don't like you. Right?
Yeah, well, I know what it means.
Your alignment changes to a randomly determined one.
Whoa.
Yeah.
A removed
That was
curse spell
crazy.
can restore your original alignment.
Yeah.
That's nasty.
Yeah.
I have a group of questions here that all kind of go together, so we'll see which way to start this. How are the downtime mechanics looking at the moment, and what can you tell us about them?
Sure. So basically what we wanted to do was make, just like everything else, make it something you can go as deep into as you want, but not feel like you have to use everything. So we present some pretty basic mechanics.
Sorry, just to back up, why did we create the downtime mechanics? What function do they serve in the game?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that, Chris. Basically, we wanted to, there's a couple of reasons. One of the things was we wanted to give players a way to influence the world around them and pursue their own character goals outside of adventures. Also, something that happens in D&D campaigns sometimes is that you're sort of going from one adventure to the next at such a breakneck pace that, you know, you tell a story that's like, we gained 20 levels in 3 weeks. Yeah, right? It's like, well, that feels like too short of a time, right? So this is a way to sort of stretch out the time period of a campaign. So it's something that resonates a little more with what you expect from fantasy stories. So anyways, the basic way we do that is we assume that a lot of these things you can do between adventures happen on a scale of 10 days at a time, and so basically like you're choosing what you're doing every 10 days, and that sort of abstracts out what your character's working on, like side projects, or I'm gonna go glad hand the guys from this faction for the next week, and it gives you a way to say what you're doing between adventures pretty easily, and give the DM a good time scale. So there's some pretty simple ones that we present right up front, and then we've got some other ones that other things you can do that the DM can choose to allow in the campaign. So, spoiler alert: crafting magic items. Right? We don't assume by default.
My second question on the way.
We don't assume by default that players can craft magic items, but if the DM wants to allow his players to craft magic items, then we have mechanics that can be used during downtime to do so, and a couple of different options even within those mechanics too. So that is something that you can use our concept of downtime, and I think it's a bit of a stretch to call it a system because it doesn't really use any rules. It uses standard time periods, but then each thing that you do kind of has its own rules, right? Because rolling into town and spending the next 10 days going on a crime spree, and rolling into town and spending the next time recuperating from your wounds, well, they don't need to they need to do their own thing, right? So we sort of leave each of those to resolve themselves in their own ways. And then again, like I say, a lot of them are optional. And one of the things I've written up recently is a lot of guidance for DMs to create new activities to present to their players. So if you've got a city in your campaign that's got an arena, it's got the kumite. If you want to say, hey guys, one of the things you can do between adventures is you can go fight in the arena and build up yourselves as this team of badass gladiators. Here's some guidelines for the DM for how to do that.
That's awesome.
Another big goal of these downtime rules is to provide a venue or an outlet for players to spend money. Right, because you go into the dungeon, you get a bunch of treasure. What do you spend it on? Well, you're not buying magic items, and at a certain point, you've got your plate mail and your horse and stuff like that. So, what do you spend it on? Well, you spend it on your castle, or you spend it to build up your thieves guild, or you spend it to
raise the dragon whose egg you found in a previous adventure.
Yeah, exactly.
That may or may not be happening soon.
How to Train Your Dragon downtime activity, right? But yeah, it's a way to let players spend time and money to accomplish their own goals.
What about, you're all DMs at the table here too, so what about like downtime activities that the DM might consider for his villains and other stuff like that? I'm using downtime activities because we're using the same term, but is that something that translates? Is that something that there's guides and information for DMs for understanding what their villains are doing while the players are doing their own thing?
We're not really making it mechanical. The DM to decide what's reasonable, what he thinks a villain could accomplish in that time. Just giving the DM flexibility rather than forcing a DM to play a game. We let the players play the game. The DM just is creating the world around it. So we wouldn't want to make a system for that because it's kind of adding a false level of precision to a DM's job. So
at the same time, there are things that would apply to the DM characters, right? So if the villain is crafting a magic item, for example,
you would know.
You could just use the same rules, right? And basically, it would give you all the same guidance. So you would know, like, all right, they met the villain here. He didn't have this item. He goes off. He starts crafting it. How long does it take before he's finished with it? Right? Those rules would translate just fine.
Yeah.
But honestly, if the DM really wants the villain to have the item, the villain's going to have the item.
And that's the thing, is you can use them or not.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We don't need to force the DM to do that.
Yeah, it's like the encounter building rules. You're not forced to run 5 encounters per day of X XP value. Just do whatever. Yeah, the DM. Just it's a starting point, but do whatever you want with the DM.
Yeah.
I have written up some guidance on if the DM, like if there's players that have, like I'm a rogue with the Thieves Guild and I'm moving against the opposing Thieves Guild, like we have written up some guidance for how to handle like conflicts between organizations and stuff. It's not necessarily tied to the time between adventures, but I could certainly see it being, if I'm building up my Thieves Guild, I can see that being a thing you want to know how other organizations react.
Yeah. So we've got at least 5 more minutes until we catch up to the time we started. We can go for longer if you guys are up for it, but I wanted to. You guys probably have work, so we probably need to cut this off. Oh, you have lunch. So we'll cut this off in about 5 minutes. Chris may come back before then, but maybe not. Let's go ahead and rules for creating your own subclasses. Since we're talking about some of the DM related stuff, have you guys found you're using those for like your specific campaigns? Like maybe you have a subclass that's for your campaign, or have you had a chance to use them at all yet?
I haven't really thought in that way.
Okay.
Yeah, my campaigns are pretty middle of the fairway right now.
Yeah. I think I was doing something stranger, like trying to adapt like a science fiction campaign or something. I probably would, but I mean, it's pretty straightforward. You can just basically loot existing subclasses in a class and mix and match those to create new things.
That's how the rules work. It's just basically stealing and.
That's like the starting point. I mean, I don't know how detailed. I mean, it's not as simple as just giving you an equation, because in the past, like I think back to second edition, it had the rules for creating your own classes. Right. Which was just, well, here's the equation. It's like, okay, and here's how to break it, right? Start with cleric, which and all this other stuff, so it's. I don't think we'd ever do that. Well, I think we will give DMs guidelines, but I don't think there'll ever be a system, because really there's no.
I mean, the truth of the matter is, I don't think you can completely systematize something that's a game design task, right? I mean, we didn't design all the subclasses with like a system first, right?
Yeah.
They were designed, and everyone that participated in the playtest saw everything had to go through rounds and rounds of iteration, and I think that's going to be true for DMs too, right? I mean, it is an ongoing process, and we have to be upfront with DMs about that in advance, right? Like, if you want to create something for your campaign that's unique, I think that's totally awesome, and we should absolutely give you all of the information that we can, but that information is never going to be a substitute for, thinking critically about what you've done, for playtesting, and for, being able to go back and say, listen, guys, I created a new cleric domain. In play, it's turning out to not work out that great. I'd like to make some tweaks. I think, any DM that's going to be creating stuff like that will need to occasionally make those kind of tweaks, because it is not something that you can create a system for and expect it to all come out balanced, because that's not the way it was designed in the first place.
Well, imbalance is something of an illusion. Balance is meaningless without the DM and the context of the campaign. I played in the Ravenloft campaign. I had a ranger, so I chose undead as my favorite enemy, and this is back in 3rd edition, so I had a budget of gold to spend, which I bought an Undead Bane longbow, and so I was a broken character for the purpose of that campaign, but is the character actually broken? It's all the context. We were playing through Ravenloft, so there was just tons and tons of undead. If we'd been playing in a campaign with, negotiating trade pacts going from town to town, my character wouldn't be broken because I have like an 8 charisma, and I'm just kind of pointless. I'm the guy who can kill undead if we ever happen to find undead. Now, that said, we've tried in 5th to get away from I've picked to be really good in this one situation and sucking in others, and that's balanced. I don't think that's actually... I don't think that holds water in an RPG campaign, because it's really just dependent on what the DM throws at you. But so there is always that X factor, though, of what the DM is doing with the campaign and how that relates to the character.
Yeah, I think that's true.
So one last question. We'll try to make this one a little bit interesting. If there's just one thing in the products that are coming out this summer that you want to make sure people see, that you want to make sure people read or look at, or that you're excited to show off in all the stuff that's coming out, what would that one thing be?
I think it goes back to the inspiration and character traits and flaws, getting people to go really embrace that and think of the characters as like a person. Even if you just roll the tables, the random tables we have, and just try to work with those. Focusing on your character as a person. Even if the person might die at first level getting killed, might get killed by a ghoul 10 minutes into the game. But I think that those are...
You care about that guy who just died 10 minutes into the game.
But I think for me, that's probably the biggest change we made to the game that's really going to affect play at the table.
What about you, Rodney? You have to answer something different, even if that's your answer.
Yeah,
Sorry.
So I answered first.
Sorry.
I'm sort of sitting here racking my brain about it, and I think there's not really, and I'm going to totally cop out of the answer, there's not really one thing that I'm excited about people seeing or paying attention to. My biggest hope for the game when it comes out is just that people will make characters and play the game and not worry so much about, did I build the best possible character? Just, did you build a character that you're having fun with? And is the DM building a campaign that is having fun with? Because at the end of the day, the most important thing to me is everyone sitting at the table, playing the game, and caring more about the story of what's happening in the campaign than the rules, right? Because that's something that our core rules are designed to do, is vanish into the background, right? And I really want everyone to feel like they are just playing the game and having a good time, and those rules all sort of vanish in the background, and that's the most important thing to me. I know that's not a single system thing, it's more of an experience thing, but even things with the monsters and stuff, right? On the DM side of thing, I want the DM to care more about making a fun, dynamic scenario, or making sure this combat is exciting, or making sure this dungeon is exciting. I want the DM to care more about that than having to worry about, how do I run this monster?
Yeah.
and I think we're headed in that direction. I'm very excited about that.
Cool. Chris?
I have a very romantic view of my experience when I first came into contact with the game in first edition, and poring over the books and finding little nuggets of mythological lore embedded in the monsters and things like that. I want people who pick up this game to feel that sort of same romance with it, that they just sort of fall in love with the way it looks, the way it's presented, the way the rules all fit together. When they read a monster description, I want them to discover things that they had either forgotten was true about the monster and that we've sort of rekindled, or something they didn't know about the monster that never had been called out before, or that we've sort of slipped into the monster because we thought it was cool and we hope that they do as well. And that when all is said and told, and they're going through and they're reading this material, that they're just discovering things about the game that make them fall in love with it all over again.
Cool.
I did think of one more thing, actually.
Yeah.
I'm really excited to see DMs interact with all the optional stuff, right? Because what I'm really looking forward to seeing is DMs looking at all of the optional material we're presenting and seeing that small rules changes or small additional content stuff can have a big impact, right? Like, I want DMs to see that all I got to do is grab the simple horror rules, the firearms rules, and ships to run my pirate horror game, right? Which is a completely different style of D&D than most people run. But you know, I'm hoping that when people pick up the game and start using it, they'll see that it doesn't take massive reams of rules to create the kind of game that you want to play and run.
Yeah. That all sounds awesome. I know you guys got to eat, so I think we're going to go ahead and end it there. Thank you, everybody out there in Internet Land, for joining us. Thank you guys for being here.
My pleasure.
Thanks, sir.
And then, yeah, hopefully we'll do this again. We won't have too long before it comes out, so we'll have to figure out how to do this once the game comes out.
There'll always be questions.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thanks again, guys.
Yeah, thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.